Is this some kind of joke? The voice, sharp and laced with the unearned confidence of youth, cut through the gentle rhythm of bristles on steel. Ensign Miller, barely a year out of the academy, stood with his hands on his hips, his white uniform a stark, almost blinding presence against the gray deck of the USS Winston. He cast a contemptuous look down at the old man on his knees. Arthur Corrigan, 87 years old, didn't stop his work. His hand, gnarled by time but still steady, moved the deck brush in a slow, deliberate figure-8 pattern, a motion he had perfected more than 70 years ago. The saltwater and soap mixture foamed and swirled, cleaning a small patch of the non-skid surface on the ship's fantail. He didn't look up. He didn't have to. He could feel the shadow of the young officer standing over him, could feel the curious and uncomfortable stares of the families and other guests enjoying the ship's open house. A few junior sailors flanking the ensign snickered, their amusement a weak echo of their superior's arrogance. "Sir, I'm speaking to you," Miller said, his voice rising in pitch and volume, demanding the attention he felt his rank deserved. "What do you think you're doing? This is an active-duty warship, not a retirement home." Arthur finished his figure-8, dipped the brush into the bucket, and slowly, with the careful deliberation of age, pushed himself to his feet. His back ached, a familiar old friend, but he stood tall, his faded blue ball cap doing little to hide the thinning white hair beneath it. His eyes, the color of a placid sea, finally met the ensign's. They held no anger, no fear, only a profound and unsettling calm. "I'm cleaning the deck, son," Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper against the sea breeze. "I can see that," Miller snapped, irritated by the man's placid demeanor. "I'm asking who gave you permission. Civilians are not authorized to perform ship's maintenance. You are a guest. A guest who looks like he got lost on his way to a bingo game. Now who are you and who said you could do this?" The small crowd of onlookers had grown. Families on their Tiger cruise, showing loved ones the vessel, now paused to watch the uncomfortable scene unfold. A mother pulled her young son a little closer. A few seasoned chief petty officers, their arms crossed, watched from a distance near the hangar bay, their faces unreadable, like ancient statues guarding a sacred rite. They knew better than to interfere with an officer correcting a civilian, yet something in their posture suggested a deep unease, a coiled stillness that waited for a signal. Arthur simply gestured vaguely toward the ship itself, a sweeping motion that encompassed the gray hull, the towering superstructure, the intricate web of antennae and radar arrays. "She asked me," he said, a faint, almost sad smile touching his lips. This was too much for Ensign Miller. The old man was either senile or mocking him, and he didn't care which. This was his watch, his deck, and his authority was being challenged in front of his men and the public. He needed to make an example. "That's it," Miller said, his voice turning to ice. "I want to see your identification. Now, you're a potential security risk." He stepped closer, invading Arthur's personal space. The two sailors behind him, taking their cue, moved to flank the old man, their expressions shifting from amusement to a practiced intimidation. Arthur sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. He reached into the back pocket of his simple khaki trousers and pulled out a worn leather wallet. It was old, the kind that folded over twice, its seams held together by little more than memory. He slowly, deliberately began to sift through its contents, past faded pictures of a woman with a kind smile and children who were now grandparents themselves. Miller's impatience boiled over. "Are you kidding me? Hurry it up, Grandpa. I don't have all day." The insult hung in the salty air, sharp and ugly. The crowd murmured, a wave of disapproval rippling through them. One of the chiefs near the hangar bay uncrossed his arms and took a half-step forward before his companion put a hand on his arm, shaking his head almost imperceptibly. "Not yet." Arthur's fingers paused on a small tarnished pin clipped to a frayed piece of fabric inside his wallet. The pin was a simple bronze star, so worn and faded it was barely recognizable. Miller scoffed, noticing the object. "What's that? Some prize you won at the county fair?" The world seemed to slow for Arthur. The ensign's mocking voice faded into a dull roar, replaced by the deafening thunder of 5-inch guns and the shriek of incoming shells. The clean, salty air of a peaceful afternoon was choked with the acrid smoke of burning steel and cordite. The gray deck of the USS Winston dissolved into the splintered, blood-slicked teak of another deck, on another ship, in another lifetime. He was 20 years old again, his uniform torn and stained with soot and the blood of his shipmates. He was on his knees, not with a scrub brush but with a wrench, desperately trying to unjam a shell hoist while the world exploded around him. The ship, the USS Johnston, was dying, fighting to the last against a vastly superior Japanese fleet. His gun mount, number 5, had taken a direct hit. He was the only one left, Through the smoke, his skipper, Commander Evans, blood streaming from a wound on his face, had knelt beside him, pressing this very same pin into his hand. It wasn't a medal. It was just a small star from a spare epaulet. "You keep fighting, Corrigan," Evans had rasped, his voice raw. "You keep fighting until the last shell is fired. You show them what we're made of." "Sir." The ensign's sharp voice pulled him back from the hellish waters of the Leyte Gulf. Arthur blinked, the ghost of smoke clearing from his vision. He was back on the Winston, an old man holding a wallet, facing a boy in a man's uniform. He looked at the pin, then back at the officer. The memory had not angered him. It had settled him, anchoring him in a purpose Miller could never comprehend. He carefully tucked the wallet away without producing any ID. "The deck needs to be clean," Arthur said, his voice now imbued with a quiet authority that had nothing to do with rank. "It's a sign of respect." This act of calm defiance was the final straw for Miller. He saw it as a flagrant disregard for his position. "Respect? You're going to learn all about respect, old man." He turned to one of his sailors. "Petty officer, escort this man to the master-at-arms office. He's to be detained for trespassing and refusing to identify himself to a commissioned officer. He's clearly confused and a danger to himself and the vessel." As the young sailor stepped forward hesitantly, a man in the crowd who had been watching with a grim expression finally acted. He was a Master Chief Petty Officer, off-duty, visiting his son who served on the Winston. He was too far away to intervene physically without causing a bigger scene, but he recognized the look in the old man's eyes. It was a look he'd seen in the mirror after his own tours in places of fire and sand. It was the look of a man who had walked through hell and found it wanting. The Master Chief didn't know the old man's name, but he knew what he was. He slipped back through the crowd, pulling out his phone. He didn't call security. This was an officer problem and a potentially catastrophic one. You don't handle a lit stick of dynamite by grabbing it. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number he was looking for. The direct line to the Admiral's personal aide. The 4-star Admiral in charge of the entire Pacific Fleet was on board for the event, hosting a luncheon for local dignitaries. The Master Chief stepped into a quiet companionway, his heart pounding. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Commander Shaw." "Sir, this is Master Chief Franklin," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I'm on the fantail of the Winston. We have a situation. Ensign Miller is publicly detaining an elderly civilian volunteer." There was a pause on the other end filled with the faint clinking of silverware. "A discipline issue, Master Chief." "Can't the ship's command handle it?" the aide, Commander Shaw, asked, his tone betraying his annoyance at the interruption. "Sir, with respect, I don't think they understand who they're dealing with," Franklin pressed. "The old man, there's something about him. He wears a faded blue cap. He's been scrubbing the deck. The ensign is making a spectacle of him. His name, Master Chief? Does this man have a name?" Shaw asked, a hint of patronizing process in his voice. "The ensign keeps demanding ID, but the man won't show it," Franklin admitted. But he pulled out his wallet. "I saw a name tag on an old card. I think it was Corrigan. Arthur Corrigan." The line went utterly silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the ship's ventilation system. When Commander Shaw spoke again, his voice was completely transformed. It was tight, strained, and stripped of all arrogance. "Master Chief, are you 100% certain of that name?" "As certain as I can be from 10 yards away, sir." "Corrigan, keep eyes on the situation. Do not let that ensign put a hand on him. Intervene if you have to. I'll take full responsibility. I'm getting the Admiral. We're on our way." The line went dead. Inside the Admiral's private dining room, Commander Shaw stood frozen for a moment, his face pale. He looked at the 4-star Admiral at the head of the table, who was laughing at a story being told by a local congresswoman. Protocol, decorum, and the chain of command screamed at Shaw to wait, to find a more delicate way. He ignored all of it. He strode to the head of the table, leaned down, and spoke in a low, intense whisper that cut through the pleasant atmosphere like a razor. "Admiral, you need to come to the fantail, right now." Admiral Harrison, a man known for his unflappable demeanor, looked up, annoyed. "Shaw, what is it?" "Sir," Shaw said, his voice trembling slightly, "Arthur Corrigan is on your ship, and an ensign is trying to arrest him." The Admiral's face, weathered by decades of service in command, went through a rapid series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, and then a profound, earth-shaking shock. The wineglass in his hand trembled. He looked at Shaw as if the aide had just told him the sea had caught fire. Art Corrigan, here," he whispered, the name a reverent invocation. He threw his napkin on the table, the motion so abrupt that the congresswoman stopped her story mid-sentence. "Excuse me," the Admiral said to the stunned table, his voice now a command that brooked no argument. "Commander, with me, now." He was already moving, his dress uniform a blur of white and gold as he stormed out of the room, Shaw trailing in his wake. The fate of Ensign Miller had just been sealed, and he was blissfully, tragically unaware. Back on the fantail, Miller's patience had evaporated completely. The old man's silent, dignified resistance was a personal affront. The crowd was now watching him, their faces a mixture of pity for the old man and disgust for the officer. He felt his authority slipping away with every tick of the clock. "I have given you a direct order, and you have refused," Miller said, his voice dangerously low. He pointed a trembling finger at Arthur's chest. "That makes you a security threat. Under Naval Regulation 3-10, I am authorized to use necessary force to ensure the security of this vessel." He was making up regulations now, drunk on his own sliver of power. "This is your last chance. Come with us peacefully, or we will make you." He took a step forward and reached out, his hand about to close around Arthur's thin arm. It was the ultimate act of hubris, the final irrevocable overreach. He was crossing a line he didn't even know existed, stepping from the solid ground of naval procedure onto the sacred, hallowed ground of history. "Ensign, stand down." The voice was a thunderclap that cracked across the deck. It wasn't a request, it was a physical force that seemed to hit Miller in the chest, stopping him cold. His hand froze inches from Arthur's sleeve. The entire crowd turned. Striding toward them from the hangar bay was the ship's captain, his face a mask of cold fury. Flanking him were his executive officer and Master Chief Franklin, who had guided them, but they were merely the honor guard. Behind them, moving with a speed and purpose that belied his age, was Admiral Harrison. The 4 gold stars on his collar seemed to burn in the afternoon sun, each one a testament to a lifetime of service and command. His eyes, fixed and fierce, were not on the captain, not on the crowd, and certainly not on the terrified ensign. They were locked entirely on the old man in the faded blue cap who still stood, calm and unmoving, next to a bucket of soapy water. The deck, which had been buzzing with murmurs and whispers, fell into a sudden profound silence. Every sailor, from the rawest seaman apprentice to the most grizzled chief, snapped to attention, their bodies rigid, their eyes forward. The air itself seemed to grow heavy, thick with anticipation. The Admiral didn't slow his pace. He walked directly past the petrified Ensign Miller as if he were a ghost, a piece of irrelevant deck machinery. He strode across the final few feet of steel separating him from Arthur Corrigan. He stopped, his polished black shoes inches from Arthur's worn-out work boots. For a moment they just looked at each other. The 4-star Admiral, commander of the most powerful fleet on the planet, and the quiet old man who scrubbed his decks. Then, in a single fluid motion that was the culmination of 40 years of naval discipline, Admiral Harrison brought his hand to his brow and delivered the sharpest, most reverent salute of his entire career. It was a salute of such profound respect that it seemed to bend the very air around them. "Mr. Corrigan." The Admiral's voice boomed, clear and steady, yet thick with an emotion that astonished everyone present. "It is an honor, sir." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Ensign Miller's jaw literally dropped, his face a canvas of utter, uncomprehending shock. The sailors who had been snickering moments before now looked as though they'd seen a sea monster rise from the depths. Arthur Corrigan, the man they were about to drag away, simply gave a slow, tired nod. The Admiral held his salute for a long moment before crisply dropping his hand. He then turned to face the stunned audience and the pale, trembling ensign. His expression had shifted from reverence to a cold, educational fury. "For those of you who don't know," the Admiral began, his voice carrying across the deck with the effortless authority of a man born to command, "let me tell you who you are looking at." He gestured, not at Arthur's face but at his entire unassuming presence. "This is Petty Officer Arthur Corrigan. On October 25, 1944, during the battle off Samar, he was a gunner's mate aboard the destroyer USS Johnston. After his ship was hit, crippled and burning, and after his entire gun crew was killed or wounded, Petty Officer Corrigan, alone and injured himself, single-handedly loaded and fired a 5-inch gun mount for over an hour, drawing the fire of a Japanese heavy cruiser away from the wounded escort carrier, Gambier Bay." The Admiral took a step toward Miller, his eyes blazing. He stood on a deck slick with the blood of his friends, surrounded by fire and screaming metal, and he did not yield. His actions that day are credited with saving the lives of over 800 sailors. For his gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. The Admiral's voice swelled, quoting directly now, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. He pointed a finger at the faded blue cap on Arthur's head. "Ensign, you see that hat you were so quick to mock? He's not wearing it to cover his head. He's wearing it because it was the last thing his best friend who died in his arms on that deck ever gave him. The story was a slight fabrication, a commander's poetic license to drive the point home, but the truth of the sacrifice behind it was absolute. You questioned his right to be on this deck. This man and men like him built this deck with their courage and their blood. He has the right to stand on any deck in the United States Navy for the rest of his life, and if he wants to scrub it, he will be given the finest brush we have. The silence that followed was broken by a single sound. A woman in the crowd began to applaud, her hands clapping with a raw emotional fervor. Then another joined, and another, until the entire fantail, civilians and sailors alike, erupted in a wave of thunderous applause and cheers directed at the quiet old man. Ensign Miller stood frozen, the color drained from his face. The world had just been pulled out from under him, his reality reordered in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. He looked from the applauding crowd to the furious Admiral, and finally to the old man who was the cause of it all. He opened his mouth, a pathetic, stammering apology forming on his lips. "Admiral, sir, I didn't know." Before he could continue, Arthur Corrigan placed a frail but firm hand on the Admiral's starched white sleeve. "Easy, Bill," Arthur said softly, using the Admiral's first name, a familiarity so shocking it silenced the applause. "He's just a boy, eager to prove himself. We were all young once, weren't we?" He turned his calm eyes toward the mortified ensign. "The uniform doesn't make the man, son," Arthur said, his voice gentle, devoid of any malice. "The man makes the uniform. You spend less time worrying about your authority, and more time worrying about your people. That's all the respect you'll ever need." As Arthur spoke those words, another image flashed in his mind, clearer than any memory. He was on his knees again on the deck of the Johnston. His dying skipper, Commander Evans, was pressing that small, tarnished star pin into his palm. It wasn't about a friend's hat, it was about a captain's last command. "Don't let them forget us, Corrigan," the captain had whispered through a bloody grimace. "Don't ever let them forget the price." And in that moment, looking at the young, humbled ensign, Arthur knew he was keeping that promise. He wasn't just scrubbing a deck, he was tending a memorial. The fallout for Ensign Miller was swift, but not what he expected. He was not discharged. Admiral Harrison, taking Arthur's words to heart, believed that wasting a young officer was as much a sin as ignoring an old hero. Miller was formally reprimanded and immediately reassigned. He was sent to Portsmouth, to the Naval History and Heritage Command, where for 6 months his only duty was to read the personal letters and battle action reports of sailors from World War II. He was tasked with writing summaries of Medal of Honor citations, forced to live and breathe the stories of the men whose legacy he had so carelessly insulted. It was an education in humility, delivered one dusty file at a time. Across the Pacific Fleet, a new training mandate was issued, titled the Corrigan Directive, focusing on naval heritage and the proper way to interact with the veterans who are its living embodiment. Several months later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the now former Ensign Miller was visiting the Battleship Wisconsin Museum. He was in civilian clothes, a more thoughtful, somber young man than the one who had stood on the deck of the Winston. As he walked through the officer's wardroom, he saw a familiar figure. It was Arthur Corrigan, a soft cloth in his hand, quietly polishing the brass frame of a portrait of Admiral Halsey. He wasn't on his knees this time, but the act was the same. It was one of reverence, of care. Miller hesitated, his heart pounding. He could have turned and walked away, and no one would have blamed him. Instead, he took a deep breath and walked over. He didn't say a word. He simply picked up another polishing cloth from the Dachshund's cart nearby, stood next to Arthur, and began to polish the frame of the neighboring portrait. Arthur paused his work for a moment and glanced at the young man beside him. He saw the change. He saw the shame, but also the newfound respect. He didn't offer a grand speech or a pronouncement of forgiveness. He just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. And together, in silence, the old hero and the humbled officer cleaned and polished the artifacts of their shared sacred history. If you were moved by this story of unassuming courage, please like this video, share it with someone who respects our nation's heroes, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that honor those who served.